The call came at 2:30 a.m. At first, I thought it was a mistake. No one calls you in the middle of the night with good news, especially not when your phone lights up with a number from a county you only visit a few times a year. When I answered, the words didn't make sense at first. "There's been a fire at your vacation cabin." For a moment, my mind refused to catch up. That cabin wasn't just a property. It was where we escaped noise, where the kids learned to swim, where life slowed down. By the time I arrived, the flames were already gone. What remained was worse. Charred wood, blackened railings, the sharp smell of smoke hanging in the cold air. The fire hadn't destroyed the entire cabin, but it had burned through the side facing the pool. The safety fence, the same fence the HOA had ordered me to remove. Fire officials said the blaze started outside, near the fence line. That detail stuck with me, because just weeks earlier, I had received another notice from the Homeowners Association, warning me, again, to remove the non-compliant structure around the pool. A structure they claimed violated community standards. A structure I claimed was keeping my family safe. Standing there in the dark, watching investigators photograph the damage, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about rules anymore. This was about pressure, and the pressure had finally turned destructive. I reveal why the HOA had been obsessed with my vacation cabin long before the fire, and what they were demanding I remove. By sunrise, the fire scene was quiet. Too quiet. Yellow tape surrounded the damaged side of the vacation cabin, and the pool area looked frozen in time. Half-burned fencing, melted plastic clips, and black scorch marks climbing up the wooden posts. The fire investigator told me something that made my stomach drop. The fire didn't spread randomly, he said. It started low. Right here. He pointed to the base of the pool safety fence. The same fence, the one the HOA had been emailing me about for months. That fence had been installed the same year the vacation cabin was built. Not as decoration, but as a requirement. The insurance company had demanded it because of the pool, the slope of the land, and the fact that the property wasn't always occupied. At the time, the HOA hadn't objected. Not once. But years later, out of nowhere, the notices started arriving. First polite, then firm, then threatening. They claimed the fence violated community appearance standards. They ignored every explanation about safety. Ignored the insurance requirement. Ignored the fact that several other cabins had nearly identical fences. What they never ignored was pressure. Every notice carried the same demand. Remove the fence. Standing in front of the burned section, I realized something chilling. If I had listened, if I had taken the fence down, the fire wouldn't have stopped at the deck. It would have gone straight to the pool, straight to the cabin, straight to whatever or whoever might have been there. I go back to the very first HOA warning and discover it was never really about the fence at all. The first HOA letter had arrived like junk mail. No urgency, no legal tone. Just a gentle reminder about compliance. Back then, I didn't panic. Why would I? The fence had been approved years earlier. It wasn't new. It wasn't altered. It wasn't dangerous. But when I reread that first letter after the fire, something stood out. It didn't cite a rule. It cited an opinion. The board believes the structure detracts from the visual harmony of the community. That sentence followed me. Because in HOA language, believes meant something dangerous. It meant interpretation. And interpretation could change depending on who you were. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The HOA had changed leadership shortly before the notices started. New board, new president, new priorities. And suddenly, my vacation cabin, the one we didn't occupy year-round, had become a problem. I searched the community records and found photos from previous HOA newsletters. Cabins with fences, cabins with screens, cabins with structures far more visible than mine. None cited, none fined, none burned. The fire didn't feel random anymore. I confront the HOA, and their response makes the fire feel less like an accident. I expected outrage, concern, an apology maybe. After all, a fire had broken out at a property they had been pressuring nonstop. Instead, I got silence. No call, no email, no statement. When I finally reached out, explaining what the fire department had said, where the fire started, the response was short. We hope you resolve the damage quickly. Please remember the fence remains out of compliance. That sentence landed harder than the flames. No mention of safety. No concern about the cause. No pause on enforcement, just the fence. It was as if the fire had validated their position instead of frightening them. That's when fear turned into resolve. I requested a formal appeal. I submitted insurance documents, photos of other cabins, the fire report's early notes. The HOA denied the appeal in under 10 minutes. No explanation, just a reminder of fines. A neighbor tells me something that makes the fire feel intentional and personal. The neighbor didn't want to talk at first. We stood near the tree line, away from the road, voices low. Finally, he said it. "You're not the first one they've pushed." He told me about another vacation cabin owner years ago who fought the HOA over a dock extension. That cabin had also caught fire. Officially, it was ruled accidental. Unofficially, everyone knew the timing was suspicious. The neighbor hesitated before adding one more thing. "The board doesn't like owners who don't live here full time. They think you're easier to scare." That night, I looked at the burned fence again, and I stopped asking whether the fire was connected. I started asking who benefited from it. I uncovered the legal truth the HOA never expected me to find, and it changed everything. The official fire report arrived 2 weeks later. I read it slowly, line by line, expecting clarity. Instead, it raised more questions than it answered. The cause was listed as undetermined. No faulty wiring, no lightning strike, no grill left unattended. But one detail was undeniable. The fire originated outside the vacation cabin, near the pool area, near the fence. That alone should have prompted deeper investigation, especially given the recent HOA pressure. But the report stopped short, almost as if someone didn't want to look too closely. When I asked the investigator directly, he chose his words carefully. "Without witnesses or surveillance, it's difficult to prove intent." Intent. That word followed me home, because intent mattered. And I knew the HOA had plenty of motive. I gathered everything. The violation notices, the denial emails, the appeal rejection, the photos of identical fences across the community. Then I took them to an attorney, not to file a lawsuit. Not yet, just to understand my position. What he told me shifted the entire fight. The deed restrictions governing the vacation cabin made no mention of pool safety fences. None. Not design, not material, not placement, which meant the HOA had no clear authority to demand removal. Even worse for them, selective enforcement, pressuring me while ignoring others when it was legally dangerous. And the fire, that changed the tone entirely. This was no longer a compliance dispute. It was a pattern. The HOA makes a move meant to scare me into silence, and it proves they're panicking. The next notice arrived by certified mail. That alone told me something had changed. The language was sharper, colder, legal. They weren't requesting removal anymore. They were demanding it. Daily fines, legal action, lying threats, all while my vacation cabin was still under repair, all while the burned fence remained exactly where the fire had started. I responded with facts. The deed restrictions, the insurance requirement, the fire report. Their reply ignored everything. Instead, they accused me of non-cooperation. That's when I understood their strategy. They wanted me exhausted, scared, financially pressured, because most people would have given up by then. Removed the fence, paid the fines, moved on. But the fire had changed something in me. I filed a formal legal notice of dispute, not a lawsuit, a warning, and the reaction was immediate. Emails started arriving at odd hours. Suddenly the HOA wanted to talk. They suggested a meeting, then mediation, then compromise, all contingent on one thing. The fence had to go. I declined, because now removing the fence felt like erasing evidence. The HOA is forced to turn over internal emails, and what I find ties the fire to their pressure. Campaign once lawyers were involved. The tone shifted again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was fear. As part of the dispute process, the HOA was required to produce internal communications related to my property. They underestimated how much existed. The emails painted a clear picture. Board members discussing how vacation cabins don't push back. Suggestions to increase pressure until compliance. Complaints about that fence by the pool. And then one email, sent weeks before the fire. "We need this resolved soon." No mention of safety. No mention of alternatives. Just urgency. Reading it made my hands shake. Because now the timeline mattered. The pressure. The threats. The fire. Individually, each could be dismissed. Together, they told a story the HOA never intended to share. My attorney leaned back after reviewing everything. "This isn't just about a fence anymore," he said. And for the first time since the fire, I believed him. The HOA tries One last tactic to make this disappear, but it only makes their position worse. The offer didn't come from the board directly. It came through their attorney. A neatly worded email, carefully framed to sound reasonable. They were willing to resolve the dispute amicably. They would pause enforcement. They would even waive past fines. But only if I agreed to one condition: a confidentiality agreement, no public discussion, no record of the fire tied to the HOA dispute, no future claims. In other words, silence. The timing said everything. The internal emails had been exposed. The fire report was being questioned. And suddenly they wanted this to disappear. I asked my attorney what would happen if I signed. The HOA walks away clean, he said. You don't? Because signing wouldn't just end the dispute. It would erase the pattern. The pressure. The threats. The fire. I declined. Within days, the tone shifted again. Delays. Procedural pushback. Thinly veiled warnings about costs and time. They were trying to wear me down. But something else was happening too. Other vacation cabin owners were watching, quietly at first, then openly. Questions started circulating at HOA meetings. Why was this fence different? Why the urgency? Why after the fire? The board couldn't control the narrative anymore. And when the HOA finally filed a formal enforcement action against me, I welcomed it. Because now everything will be on record. The HOA tries to justify its authority in court. And one question exposes the truth that they can't escape. Court didn't feel dramatic. It felt precise. Every word mattered. The HOA's attorney spoke first, laying out the familiar argument: community standards, appearance, consistency, authority. He avoided the fire completely, focused instead on rules that sounded solid until the judge asked to see them. Where, the judge said, does the deed restriction prohibit this type of pool safety fence? The attorney hesitated. He flipped pages, cleared his throat, then admitted what the HOA had avoided for over a year. There was no written restriction. Not specific, not implied, not enforceable. The judge didn't stop there. Why, he asked. Were similar fences allowed on other vacation cabins? The HOA tried to argue discretion. The judge wasn't interested. Selective enforcement, he explained, wasn't discretion. It was abuse of authority. Then came the fire. My attorney introduced the timeline, the emails, the pressure notices, the origin point of the blaze. No accusations, just facts. The courtroom went quiet. The HOA president wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge didn't accuse anyone of arson. He didn't need to. He ruled the HOA had exceeded its authority, acted in bad faith, and violated state law. The enforcement action was dismissed. The fence stayed. But the consequences didn't end there. The fallout spreads far beyond my vacation cabin, and the HOA learns what unchecked power really costs. The ruling hit the community fast. Because once the HOA lost, the question wasn't just about my fence. It was about precedent. Under state law, when an HOA acts in bad faith, it can be held responsible for legal costs. All of them. The board was ordered to pay my attorney fees, court costs, and administrative expenses. But money wasn't the real damage. Trust was. Vacation cabin owners began reviewing their own notices, comparing stories, asking questions. Why were some properties targeted repeatedly while others were ignored? Within months, board meetings became tense. 2 members resigned. The HOA president stepped down quietly. New leadership took over, cautious, restrained, and very aware of scrutiny. The rules were rewritten. Safety structures were clarified and protected. And the burned section of my vacation cabin, it was repaired. Not erased. I left the fence exactly where it had always been. Because now it wasn't just a barrier. It was proof. I returned to the cabin for the first time since the fire, and realized what this fight truly changed. I didn't go back to the vacation cabin right away. Not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I wasn't sure how it would feel. That place had always been simple, quiet, predictable. Now it carried weight. When I finally returned, months after the fire, the repairs were finished. New siding replaced the charred wood. Fresh paint covered the smoke stains. From a distance, the cabin looked unchanged. Up close, it told a different story. The fence was still there, unmoved, unapologetic. The same fence the HOA had called a problem. The same fence the fire had tried to erase. Standing beside it, I remembered how close everything had come to being worse. The fire hadn't reached the interior. The pool hadn't been involved. No one had been there that night. Luck had played a role, but so had resistance. Neighbors stopped by that afternoon. Some to check in, some to quietly say thank you. They didn't talk about the fire directly. They didn't need to. What they talked about instead was relief. Because if the HOA could push one owner that far, they could push anyone. That's what had changed. Not just a ruling. Not just leadership. Awareness. I explain what the HOA never understood and why this story isn't really about offense at all. Looking back, people often ask what the turning point was. They assume it was the courtroom or the ruling. But the real turning point happened much earlier, the night the vacation cabin burned. Because that's when the pressure crossed from bureaucratic to dangerous. HOAs are built on rules, but rules without limits turn into power. And power without accountability looks exactly like what I experienced. The fire didn't prove who was responsible. It proved something else. It showed how far pressure can go when people believe no one will push back. The fence is still there today, not because I won, but because it was never wrong to begin with. It was legal. It was necessary. It was protective. And now it's symbolic. A reminder that safety matters more than appearance. That silence helps abuse spread. And that authority only works when it isn't questioned. Every time we return to the cabin, I see it differently now. Not as a retreat, but as proof that standing your ground, even when it's exhausting, even when it's frightening, can change more than just your own situation. The HOA thought pressure would make me comply. The fire made me confront, and the confrontation changed everything. If you live under an HOA, remember this. Rules are only as strong as the people willing to challenge them.